Today, I'll walk you through the key components I developed for iteration 2 of our Smart Recipe application. In this iteration, we focused on transforming our UI prototype into a fully functional web application by implementing backend functionality and connecting it to our front end. So let me guide you through the components, their functionality, and how they integrate with each other. So let's firstly talk about backend components. Recipe and review controllers. Firstly, I implemented the recipe and review controller in the controller folder. Recipe and the review controller. These controllers handle the core CRUD operations for our recipes and reviews. For example, in the recipe controller, I implemented functions like get all recipes, get recipe by ID, create recipe, update recipe, and delete recipe. Each function connects to our MongoDB database via Mongoose models, processes the request, and returns the appropriate response. The review controller is similar, handles operations like create review, get reviews by recipe, and delete review, establishing relationships between users, recipes, and their reviews. And next, let's talk about root handlers, which I did is recipe roots and review roots. In recipe roots.js and review roots.js, I set up the express roots that map to our controller functions. An important enhancement was implementing mass image upload functionality using Motor middleware for recipe images, allowing users to upload photos of their recipes. And next, we're going to talk about Yelp API integration. So, a major feature I implemented was the Yelp API integration through Yelp service.js. It's in the services folder here. Yeah, the service encapsulates all Yelp API calls in a clean and reusable interface. It handles location-based searches using coordinates or address information and transforms the API response into a consistent format which our frontend can use. I also implemented error handling to ensure a smooth user experience if the external API fails. Yeah, it's here. Catch error and console log it. And the next section is the front-end components. First, let's see API service layer. It's in the client services API.js. One of the most important components I created was the API service layer. This centralized service manages all API calls to our backend, providing a clean interface for our React components. For example, instead of writing axios calls directly in our components, we can now use method like recipe service dot get recipe by ID, recipe service dot create recipe. Yeah, like this one, get all recipes, get recipe by ID, and get reviews by recipe, create review, something like this. This approach improves code maintainability, centralized authentication token handling, and makes it easier to handle API-related errors consistently across our application. Next, let's see recipe detail page. It's in recipe detail.jsx. I updated the recipe detail page to connect to our backend API. This page now fetches real recipe data, displays users' reviews, and provides functionality to save, edit, or delete recipe. The page manages several pieces of state, including loading status. Here is loading and set loading. So this page manages several pieces of state, including loading states, errors, and user interactions like posting reviews. I implemented optimistic UI updates to provide immediate feedback while API calls happen in the background. So next, let's talk about recipe creation form. It's in the add-recipe.jsx. For the recipe creation interface, I enhanced the form to handle file uploads. For file uploads and connect to our backend API. This required careful state management to handle form validation, file uploads, and submission states. I implemented a dual-purpose component that serves both for creating new recipes and editing existing ones, determining its model based on URL parameters and adjusting its behavior accordingly. Yeah, you can see the code here. This is the validator for the add recipe form. And now let's talk about recipe card components. Recipe card components is in the components folder and recipe card.jsx. I updated the recipe card component to work with the real data and handle user interactions like saving recipes. This reusable component appears throughout our application and now includes state to manage saving actions and visual feedback. And next, let's move to homepage with Yelp. With Yelp integration, it's in home.jsx. Finally, I enhanced the homepage with the Yelp API integration. This component now provides restaurant recommendations based on users' location, offering an alternative if they don't want to cook today. The homepage uses the browser's geolocation API to get the user's coordinates. coordinates and then passes this information to our backend API, which communicates with Yelp service. This component manages loading status, errors, and that of restaurant results. You can see here use effects, and we fetch restaurant data by coordinates. If we don't have coordinates, then the backup plan is here. It's based on a location, and I set the location to Vancouver, BC. Yes. And in Yelp service, JS, I set the radius to be 3,000 meters, which is 3 kilometers. We can see here the restaurant shown here are all in the radius of 3 kilometers. If we clicked more options, it will refresh and some new restaurants will be displayed. Now let's move to the final part in integration and communication. So our application follows a clear data flow pattern. First, React components request data through our API service layer. And secondly, the service layer makes HTTP requests to our Express backend. Thirdly, Express routes direct these requests to appropriate controllers, and controllers interact with the database through Mongoose models. And finally, results flow back through the same path to update our UI. So, in summary, my work in Iteration 2 focused on building a robust backend and connecting it seamlessly to our front-end components. By implementing proper separation of concerns and a clean API service layer, we have created a maintainable and scalable application architecture. All components work together to provide a cohesive user experience, from browsing recipes to creating their own, as well as discovering nearby restaurants through the Yelp integration. The application now has a solid foundation that we can continue to build upon in iteration 3. And in iteration 3, our plan is to connect to OpenAI API to generate recipes based on user-provided ingredients. And we want to migrate our user authentication from custom JWT authentication to Auth0 or Auth0 platform, which Nada taught this week. And we want to do further refinement of UI design and CSS styling. And finally, we want to do some final adjustments to ensure optimal experience across all devices, which will be taught in week 13 by Nada, I guess. So let me display our application. It's deployed on render.com, and we can log in. And now we can see the restaurants that are recommended, and we can build our recipe. Yeah, let me try it. It should work. and we can upload some images. And we click about publish recipe, and the website said recipe created successfully. So we are redirected to the recipe detail page, and we can see the whole amount of data, the recipe data in search page, and we can search a specific recipe by input. Yeah, it's here. And if the user is logged in, who created the recipe, and we can see the edit button instead of the save button. We can edit. We can update. It's been successfully updated. And if we click user icon, then we move to profile page. And in profile page, we have my created recipes and my saved recipes. They all display the real data. And here's the recipe that I saved. We can click on save. Yeah, it's been unsaved. And we can edit profile. Yeah, if I add a number 6, save changes. Yeah, the username has been changed. So we go back home. The only important feature we haven't done yet is the OpenAI API. So in next iteration, as I just said, we will develop. Okay, here's the code walk. I'm gonna wrap up. Thank you for watching.